All right, so we're going to start with a little music, a little song about wild encounters here. And of course, you don't know the words, but you can help me with a song by being in my rhythm section. In the rhythm section, you know, drums, cymbals, all those kinds of things. And since you didn't bring those types of things with you, you'll have to improvise. So since you're sitting, you could tap your toe to the beat of the music if you wanted to. Or some people are able to snap their fingers, make a little percussion sound. Or you could clap, except you can only clap with one hand. Because you clap with two hands, it makes too much sound. So how do you make a sound with one hand? You just lightly tap your leg or something like that. And if you don't want to snap your fingers, tap your toes or snap your fingers, you can just sit there with a blank look on your face and just listen as well, okay?
Because of the potential of the bees.
Say that what?
Let's not tap our feet too hard just because of the potential of the bees.
Oh, the bees, okay, all right.
Sorry.
So, all right. So if you tap your toes, do it just a little gently, okay? Like a tap, not a stomp. Okay? Not like you're clogging, okay? Some people say, what's clogging? If you live in the mountains, you know what clogging is. Okay, so I'll start the beat of the music, then you add your very light tapping toe or your one-handed clap, or your snapping fingers, or your blank stare, and then we'll add some words to the song, okay? That was just the beginning. Here's the rhythm. I hear need some more rhythm out there. There we go. Get ready for a wild encounter, a visit with some animal friends. They are creatures from the wild, but their temperament is mild. Get ready for a wild encounter. Get ready for a wild encounter. They're waiting now to visit a while with you. Some of them slither, crawl, and slide. Others jump and runners simply hide. Get ready for a wild encounter. A wild encounter could take your breath away and leave you speechless too. A wild encounter could bring you lots of joy and even put a smile on you. So get ready for a wild encounter. Do you wonder what you're gonna meet? It might be long with shiny scales or furry with a tail. Get ready for a wild encounter. Get ready for a wild encounter. Are you ready for a wild encounter? If you're ready, say, I'm ready. Very good. Thank you for helping me out with my song. Maybe we'll cut a CD. Okay. Then you can stomp your feet a little louder. All right. So once again, what is a wild encounter? It's that moment when you get to be in the right place at the right time to meet one of your wildlife neighbors. Now, I think that's a good thing, personally. But, you know, when you're out in the woods walking around, you can just kind of expect that to happen. Sometimes you could be in your yard, just by accident happen in your backyard, front yard. Even like at my house, sometimes if you leave the door open, I've had wild encounters, things that have come inside, you know. But you never know when a wild encounter is going to happen. But sometimes you can make a wild encounter happen if you know a little bit about the habitats of an animal that you want to meet, the kind of weather it likes, those kinds of things, temperatures it prefers, you know. So wild encounters, particularly in the mountains here, can be very varied and with a lot of different things. So our first wild encounter, if I had to ask you to take a vote, if you want your first wild encounter to be as big as a bear or as small as a bug, raise your hand if you choose the bear. Okay, all right. All right, now, some people get a little nervous, okay, all right. Now, put your hand if you'd rather have a wild encounter as small as a bug to begin with. Okay, not quite as many. Okay, now I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I don't have a bear. I don't have a bear. I had to leave a bear at home. My truck's is not big enough, and I don't have a bear now. But you might have a wild encounter with a bear right here, and probably some of you have. And I actually could have brought a bug, but I didn't bring a bug either. But I brought a lot of things in between. So nothing I have is huge, nothing I have is really tiny, but there's a lot of in-between things. And really, you know, the reason most of you probably voted for something as big as a bear is I found out in the world of nature that a lot of people think that if it's a bigger creature, that it's maybe a more exciting creature, maybe it's more an important creature, you know. So I heard Pam say something about that was a bald eagle earlier. And I don't know if anybody knows her, but that probably got some people's attention. That got my attention. I was trying to look and try to find it. But if she said there's a lizard on a rock over there, a lot of people, or a grasshopper over there on the grass, probably nobody would have gone over to it. Why is that? We think that the big animals are more important, but ecologically speaking, the little things make a bigger difference because there's more of them. And that's why there's more of them, because they make such a big difference. So yes, I get excited when I see a bear. I get excited when I see a deer. I also get excited when I see a beetle, a bug of some sort or something like that. So we're not starting with a bug, and we're not going to go as big as a bear, but we got a lot of things in between. But we are going to start with something small. And to start with here, we're going to also kind of mimic the conditions this creature likes to kind of mimic the kind of a place where you would find this creature, the kind of weather, you know, everybody loves the weather today, the beautiful weather, right? Yeah, this is great weather. But what if you were here in the middle of February? Raise your hand if you actually live here. Okay, so a bunch of you are residents here. So you may be here in the middle of February. Now, if it was a rainy, stormy night in the middle of February, it was really kind of cold outside, where would you be? Probably in your house, right? All right, more than likely. But not me. I'm a naturalist. I might be outside, depending on how cold it is. If the temperature gets above 45 degrees on a February night, and there's a rainy night, and the rain continues through the dark hours, and it's above 45 degrees, so then something really magical happens in the world of nature that I look forward to while you're safe and sound asleep in your bed or staying warm by the fire or whatever. And we're going to kind of mimic those conditions so we can make this animal kind of magically appear, okay? Because if you want to have certain wild encounters, you've got to be there when it happens. This is the only time you'd have a wild encounter with this creature, about that time of year. You'll find out why in a moment. So to do this, we're going to have to mimic some conditions. First of all, we're going to have to make it rain. Okay, don't worry, we got a roof over. It's not going to really rain on us. But we can make the sound of rain. So how do you make the sound of rain? Maybe make some like little pitter patters with your hands, and then make it rain really hard. I hear more rain, more rain. All right, very good. Okay. All right, so what's going to happen here, on the count of 3, I'm going to have everybody make it rain really, really hard. And then at the same time, I'm going to have you close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to pretend you're in the woods and it's pouring down rain on a cool February evening. Not cold enough for snow, but it's raining, a little bit above 45 degrees or so, but it's pouring down rain. Don't worry, you got your rain jacket, you got your umbrella, whatever you need, and it's pouring down rain, and you're in the middle of the woods, and you're expecting something really exciting to happen in the world of nature, a special wild encounter that can only happen under those conditions. So I want you to think rain, imagine you're out in the woods, make it sound like rain, and don't open your eyes until I tell you to open your eyes. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, close your eyes, make it rain really hard. Just think now you're out in the woods, in the middle of the woods there. It's raining hard. It's raining hard. Just imagine that it's raining. Just imagine that it's raining. Just imagine. Use your imagination. I'm sure all of you have great imagination, great imagination. I'm sure you can imagine that. Okay, you may open your eyes now. Boy, y'all did a good job. Some of you are even a little damp. Wow. It wasn't that bad of a walk up here from the parking area, was it? Okay, all right. So in any case, all right. So you might have to get a little wet to see this kind of thing. All right. So what is this creature I'm talking about? Well, we're going to find out. So on a rainy night, if the conditions are met, it's got to be dark. It's got to be raining. The rain has to soak in the ground and wake up a sleeping creature that lives here in these mountains. And if all those things are happening right, would help if I go to the right table, you might get to see one of the coolest creatures that lives here in the mountains, at least in my opinion. And this creature is called a spotted salamander. All right, so I'm going to come by, and if you feel like you want to, you may take one finger, as you don't mind getting wet, and touch this kind of somewhat slimy, wet creature. It's kind of like a little gummy worm type thing. And I'll keep them kind of wet because they like to be damp, obviously. And I'll tell you more about why spotted salamanders are seen on rainy nights in February, okay? So this is a spotted salamander. First of all, how many of you have ever seen a salamander? If you live here, you have better have seen a salamander. Did you know that you live in the salamander capital of the entire world?
No, I didn't know that.
Right here in western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, eastern Tennessee, this area here, we have more species of salamanders than anywhere else in the entire planet Earth. We have more individual numbers of salamanders. We have more species of salamanders. And this is a salamander capital of the world. So if you want to see a salamander, you might go down here to one of the streams and flip over some rocks. You might see a salamander. You might go down in the woods here and turn over a mossy, rotting log and find a salamander. You might go out on a rainy night with a flashlight and see some salamanders walking through the woods. But the spotted salamander you're only going to see on a rainy night in the middle of February, because other than that, they live deep underground in little burrows and crevices. They're a member of what we call the mole salamander family. They burrow. They have these big snouts they use to burrow and go in little crevices. And they stay underground all year long. But then, in the middle of February, if the temperature is correct, and it's warm enough, and the rain is coming down, and it lasts until the dark hours, they are awakened from their hibernation state down underground, and they come up and stick their nose up above the leaves, and they say, oh, it's raining out there, oh, it's dark, and then they have a purpose. They come out and then they start walking down the mountain slopes to little pools and puddles that are forming down under on the forest floor, what we call ephemeral pools or temporary pools. They're literally just puddles, and it may just be a few inches deep, it might be a few feet across, but they're puddles where these guys go to reproduce. So it's their annual migration to lay their eggs. So when they get there, they meet other spotted salamanders. The males usually get there first. I'll come around that other side there for a moment. And when they get there, they have these elaborate courtship dances that they use to find the females. And then they end up laying their eggs in these large masses that swell up about the size of your fist. They're almost always attached to an underwater stem or stick or something like that. And then on another rainy night, it could be the next night, it could be a week later, whatever, they will leave those little puddles and pools, and they will start walking back to their homes in the forest, but only on another rainy night when it's really wet, just like the rainy conditions that brought them in. So this is an underground salamander that would never be seen except if you're out on a rainy night in February. So this time of the year, if you wanted to find one, you probably need a bulldozer to go and look around and find one somewhere, unless you were just lucky. But they're beautiful salamanders. They're one of the salamanders that are kind of unknown by the average person. And most people are very much more familiar with other salamanders that live in our area. So spotted salamanders are really great to me. Now, and I don't like winter too much, but I do look forward to the middle of February when the spotted salamanders start their annual migration, because I know that from that point on, a lot of other amphibians are going to be doing something, and we're going to be leading into springtime, which is my favorite time of the year. So spotted salamanders are our first wild encounter today. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys may have to cross highways to get to where they're going to lay their eggs, and they often get smashed on the highway and that sort of thing. And you might wonder, why are they laying their eggs in little puddles and pools? They land in those places because those places will dry up later in the summer. So maybe sometime by midsummer, those places dry up. But by then, their little larvae have hatched out, have matured, and have gone on to land to become a big adult like this eventually. And they don't want to lay their eggs where fish live. And so they, like many other amphibians, they target little temporary puddles and pools because fish don't live there. So you might protect a beautiful wetland like a creek or a stream or a river or a pond or something like that, but you don't realize that puddles and little low-lying depressions that have water in them are especially important for types of amphibians like this, which in turn are food for a lot of other animals, and they in themselves eat a lot of invertebrates, insects, and other things, and control the population of those things. And they are just beautiful creatures. And you know, if you like beautiful colors and hidden treasures, if you get interested in salamanders, they come in every color of the rainbow. They have stripes, they have spots, they have purples and reds and all kinds of colors, you know, and they're just amazing creatures. But a lot of them are very secretive, and you have to go looking for them. And of course, the spotted salamander, you'd have to look underground unless you're out on a rainy night in the middle of February when the conditions are just right. So our first wild encounter, a beautiful spotted salamander. Okay. All right, so we can put our spotted salamander away and move on to wild encounter number 2. By the way, what kind of a group of animals do salamanders belong to? Does anybody know? They're amphibians, right. So we're going to move to another amphibian next, which is more active right now, okay? And this amphibian is one that makes a sound. Now, spotted salamanders don't make any sounds, but at this time of year, there are some other amphibians that do make some sounds. And if you go out on a rainy night now, when it's a little bit warmer, it might be a little more comfortable, but it's still rainy, you might hear a high-pitched, short, harsh trill, kind of a And you might hear it and say, what is that and where is it coming? It might sound like it's coming from a tree, and it may be, but a little bit later it'll be coming down from a little bit lower down. So this amphibian is not a salamander, but it is a frog. And this is called the gray tree frog. Okay? Now let's get him a little bit wet. Now I was getting ready to say, we have to be careful. He might jump. So, I should say, this is a female. The male's a little smaller. Let's see if we can get it on this tree. This may be a futile attempt. Let's see if we can get her. Would you get up there and just stay? I'll tell you what. I'll start off with her on something else here. Maybe she'll feel more comfortable in here for a moment. Or maybe not. So we're going to show it. So this is a tree frog called a gray tree frog. It's the only really true tree frog we have that lives around here. And gray tree frogs. I need a bigger tree. Gray tree frogs have sticky little toe pads, and they climb trees. Now, listen, stay still. Just stay still. Just for a minute. I promise I'm going to eat you. All right. So, if you're walking by a tree, and you probably wouldn't notice this tree frog on the bark, would you? They have multiple shades of gray, which match the multiple shades of gray on a tree bark. So they're very hard to see. But also, depending on the temperature and the location, they can actually change their colors. So if they're out on the trees, leaves, out on the sunny area, they'll turn kind of a light greenish color. If they're back in the shade of the tree, they'll turn kind of a dark color. And then we're somewhere in between, there'll be a multiple shades of light gray and green like you see right here. And then if a predator does spot them or something, then they take a big flying leap and jump to another branch or another tree. By the way, if you had the athletic ability that a gray tree frog has for its size body in your body, you could easily go outside and jump over this pavilion with no problem at all. And it's just amazing the ability to jump that they have. And they do have sticky little toe pads so that they can, whatever they land on, they're going to stick to it, and they can stick to vertical surfaces as well. And gray tree frogs have always fascinated me. But they are so vocal this time of year. So this is their breeding time of the year. As soon as we get into May and June, they start calling when it starts to be kind of rainy thunderstorm nights. And once we get a little deeper into the season here, gray tree frogs will come out of the trees. They'll come down to little temporary puddles and pools of water, just like the spotted salamanders did, maybe in the same areas, or maybe even smaller puddles. You might even have a bucket of water sitting out, or a horse trough, or anything like that. I've had them go to a wheelbarrow full of water or something in my yard, and the males will find each other, and the females will find each other there, and they'll lay all these little eggs that kind of float on the surface of the water, and they'll continue their breeding all the way through the end of summer. And they'll sometimes have multiple egg-laying sessions there, but you'll always hear them. Like, can you do that? And that's exactly what they sound like when they get together in these little breeding puddles and stuff like that. You'll hear a bunch of them. So go out on a rainy night and listen to the gray tree frogs right now. They are definitely out right now. Okay. All right. So you like that tree a little bit better. But I just think they're so cool with their camouflage. By the way, they will actually hibernate down in the leaves on the forest floor, and they'll turn black like the soil, and they look almost impossible to find. And they can actually pack some sugars inside their body in such a way they have kind of natural antifreeze. So these little guys don't have to go really deep down underground to hibernate in winter, and they might actually freeze solid in the wintertime and thaw out in the spring. So that's kind of amazing, the fact that they have so much water in their systems that they're able to do that. All right. So that's the gray tree frog. Now I know what you're thinking. You say, oh my gosh, I came to this program, we're going to just look at tiny little things like frogs and salmon. No, we're going to look at some bigger things. But these are little things that are very important. That we walk by, we don't see, they're important in the food chain, and to me they're just as exciting as some of the bigger things. And you're more likely to have a wild encounter with some of the small things because there's so many more of them if you know when and where to look. But this next one's not going to be hard to see. We're going to see this next one here. And if we have, animals sometimes do things when you don't want them to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay a little protection on the ground here. Sometimes animals kind of like to poop, and this is such a beautiful gazebo here, and I'd hate to have to clean the floor here before I leave, but that might happen. But just to be on the safe side, I'm going to lay down a little protection right here. because animals do whatever they need to do whenever they want to do it. So I'll probably stay mostly right here. I might walk a little closer to you. But this will be maybe a little bit more of an exciting wild encounter. Now, this is a wild encounter that would mostly happen at night. And it could happen anywhere here in the mountains here, but it's especially more likely to happen if you're near water. Water is a magical oasis of a lot of life, and for a lot of reasons, But this animal is a predatory creature that likes to hunt things that live in and around the water. Okay, now to show you this creature, I'm going to have to use a special tool here. I'm going to have to use my glove here. And not because I'm worried about it biting me. It doesn't even have any teeth. But it does have some very sharp claws, and the claws are known as talons. And if you know what kind of things talons are, you might have a little clue as to what kind of a creature I'm getting ready to show you, okay? All right, so I'm going to reach under the table here and bring out a very exciting wild encounter. And this is an owl. Okay. All right, hold still. Hold still. Getting all tangled here. Here we go. All right. Wait a minute. We'll get there in a moment. Okay. Well, hold on. There. We're getting there. Boy, you got yourself all wound up there. Here we go. And now let's get situated. There we go. All right. All right. Now next will come the poop. That's why I'm going to stand here for a moment. Animals often poop when they're frightened by something. And animals always have a little poop stored up in them, what I call an emergency poop. So it's a kind of a disgusting thing. And, so if an animal catches another animal, sometimes they'll poop or pee or something like that. And that sometimes thwarts a predator, but not always. But anyway, this is an owl. Does anybody know what kind of owl? This is a little test here. What kind of an owl this is? What?
Baron.
No.
Bard.
What?
Bard.
Bard, spell it.
B-A-R-D.
Okay, very good. Okay. And the reason I asked you to spell it was simply because there's another owl that lives in our area, not so much as in the woods, but around more agricultural areas, fields and pastures, called the barn owl. B-A-R-N, but this is the barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D. So if you say barred or barn, it sounds very similar. And a lot of times I walk away from a presentation and people say, I love the barn owl you showed, B-A-R-N. I said, no, it was a barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D, which is named for the little bars, which are part of the pattern. So there's two separate owls with a very similar name. So we want to make sure we know which one we're talking about. Now the barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D, this one right here, is more of a woodland owl, whereas the barn owl is more of a agricultural area, flying over hay fields, looking for little rodents called voles, sometimes live in old barns and places like that, old buildings. So they're a very different kind of owl. But the barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D, could be found anywhere in the mountains here, but especially near woods that are near water. And the reason for that is once again, they like to hunt things that live in and around the water. Now they don't dive into water like an osprey or something like that, but they may hop into shallow water and they might catch a crayfish to eat. They might catch a little fish or a frog or a salamander or anything like that, little amphibians. But if they're in a drier area, they're going to catch whatever they can. They're going to eat a little mouse, some kind of a rodent of some sort, maybe big insects, or maybe even a smaller bird. Big owls often eat little owls. Now this is not our biggest owl we have around here. The biggest one we have is a great horned owl, but this is kind of like the next size down. So the barred owl is one of my favorites for a variety of reasons. I've had a lot of interesting wild encounters with owls like this. In fact, I'll tell you a little interesting wild encounter with an owl like this. When I played the song there, I said that a wild encounter can bring you lots of joy and put a smile on your face, and that's pretty true for a lot of wild encounters. But there's another verse of that song I don't always sing, but it talks about how a wild encounter can really frighten you as well. And I'm going to tell you about one of the most intense wild moments I ever had with a wild creature where I was never in any danger, but unless I'd had a bad heart, I would have probably died of a heart attack. Just from being taken by surprise. But many years ago, I was out on a deer hunt in the mountains here, and when I was younger, I would go deer hunting a lot, and I would go to some of the most remote areas in the mountains here where other people wouldn't go in hopes to get into the buck of a lifetime, And there's one area out on Pisgah National Forest where I used to go, and it was way up on a mountaintop ridge where there's a lot of good deer sign with buck rubs and nice trails and where the deer go, and a lot of acorns we were feeding on. And it was late winter, way back in the 1980s, and I was very young back in those days, and I would just go to the ends of the earth almost for deer hunting. I was just obsessed with deer hunting. I often didn't get a deer, but was obsessed with deer hunting. And deer hunting in the mountains here can be really rough because these mountains are steep and rugged. So I went to one of these places where you normally don't go and other people wouldn't go, but there was a lot of good deer sign there. So I went there one morning, and I wanted to get there really early because I was going to walk really slow and make sure I snuck into my area I was going to hunt. And I did such a good job of sneaking in that morning. I got there about 5 in the morning, about 2 hours before the sun would actually come up. And I was within about 50 yards of where I'd planned to hunt. I had some little markers on the trees and stuff like that. And I was walking around real slow. I would just take a couple of steps in the frosty leaves, and I'd stop and I'd listen. And I'd take another little half step, and I'd stop and listen. Then maybe another little half step. And I'd sound like a deer walking through the forest looking for acorns, or maybe like a bear shuffling around. So I wasn't frightening anything. I didn't have that 2-footed man gait, that you hear walking in the woods. It's got to be a human being. And I walked through a stand of mountain laurel. Raise your hand if you know what mountain laurel is. Okay, living here in the mountains, it's one of our signature shrubs, I would say. It's an evergreen shrub that has tiny little leaves. It looks a little bit like a rhododendron. Raise your hand if you know what a rhododendron is. Rhododendrons like it more a little bit towards wetter areas. Mountain laurel like it where it's drier. But they often grow in thickets. And some of the mountain folks call these things laurel hells because they're so thick. But actually in the mountains, the way things are, when the early settlers came over, they had things switched around. And the mountain laurel they called ivy, and the rhododendrons they had the name for as laurel, so they had it kind of mixed up. So when you talk about a laurel hell, which is just a very thick patch of stuff, they're actually talking about rhododendrons. But I was actually in a mountain laurel hell, if you want to call it that. It's so thick that you can almost not walk upright in it. But in any case, I did have a little path through there, but it was so thick that anything sitting in a tree would not see you. You would just hear you. And there's a poop in case you didn't catch it there. All right. Well, that means maybe I can move a little closer to you in just a moment here. Okay, but in any case, I was very astute. I was very quiet. I was walking around very quietly on this ridge top, and I was miles away from the nearest hunter. 2 hours before the sun came up. Cold November morning, and I just came out of this mountain laurel thicket and came and stopped in this open area where there's a big oak tree, and I was using my tiny little flashlight to look for a little marker I had near the ground there, and unknown to me, a barred owl was sitting on a branch, maybe about as high as the top of this gazebo here. Now, I didn't see it because I wasn't shining my flashlight all over the place, and this owl would normally have taken off and flown away if it heard me coming, but all I heard was footsteps that sounded like a deer or a bear moving through there. So, and it couldn't see me because I was in a thick laurel until I suddenly popped out underneath this tree. And then it did what owls sometimes do when they're taken by surprise by something at close range. They'll either freeze like a statue and let you go on by, but since I didn't keep on moving, it thought maybe I discovered its hiding place. It didn't know what I was. Maybe it was something I could climb up in a tree and eat it. Maybe I could fly. Maybe I could. So it needed to create a diversion to get away from me. So there in the darkness, 2 hours before the sunrise, me all alone on a mountaintop, tiny little flashlight looking at the ground, owl above me, which I didn't know. The owl did what they do in situations like that. High-pitched scream. I can do that out here in the wild here because maybe nobody will know. But imagine your most frightening scream you've ever heard from somebody. Most terrifying scream. They'll make your heart almost stop. That's what it sounded like. What would you have done if you had been me in that situation? Above your head in the darkness that happened. You might scream yourself. You might faint. You might pee in your pants or worse. You might start running for home. But you don't get to choose it. Part of your body your reflex I could just take over. And next thing you know, I was face down on the ground in the frosty leaves, curled up like a little ball like that, trying to protect my inner parts and stuff like that. And then the logical part of my mind rotated around and said, oh my gosh, you've just been screamed at like by a barred owl. I'd heard them do that before and from great distances, just not up so close. But it really did happen. It scared the bejeebies out of me. And like I said, if I'd had a weak heart, I'd probably have died of a heart attack up there. But I never saw the owl because at that point it flew off, and they have silent wing beats. They have feathers that have little tufts of feathers on there that muffle the sound. And he flew off, And but I got up and dusted myself off, and found my honey place and sun came up a couple hours later, and no, I didn't see any deer that morning. That sound carried down in the valley and up to the next ridge top, scared away all the animals. I saw a couple of squirrels, a couple of birds, something like that. But I came away with an absolutely true and a fascinating story. And ever since then, I've been kind of fascinated by barred owls. And I do some wildlife rehabilitation work with birds of prey. And this is a bird that came to me about 13, 14 years ago. Its name is Harry. Now, just because its name is Harry doesn't mean that it's like a pet. You might say, it's got a leash, it must be a pet. You're going for walking your owl, walking your dog. No. So don't make a pet out of an owl. It's against the law. These are birds of prey. They're related to hawks, eagles, falcons. They're highly protected by law. And the only way I can have one of these here today is I have a special permit for this bird because it can no longer live in the wild. And this bird used to live in South Carolina. And there was a guy who lives up in this area who had a farm in South Carolina. And years ago, he was leaving his farm after a deer hunting trip, coming back to his home here in North Carolina, and he got out on the main highway, started driving, and he saw a couple of cars stopped, and he pulled over to see if they needed help, and then he noticed this bird was in the middle of the road. This bird had been hit by a car. And that's not uncommon because owls and hawks by daytime and owls by night, they'll sit on branches of trees near the edge of a highway because there's an open area where little animals will cross the highway, but also brushy areas of the highway will attract small rodents and other things because of the kind of habitat it is. So it's a very great place to hunt for food, but it's a deadly place to do it. So this bird had probably spotted something, locked its eyes on it, swooped down to get it, and got hit by a car. So this owl had a concussion, bleeding in the brain. Its head was tilted to one side. It was all befuddled, didn't know what was going on, could easily die to that. From the collision with the car, one part of its wing was almost completely ripped off. There's just a little bit of from the wrist out was hanging by just a little bit of tissue there. So this bird was in pretty bad shape. So he scooped it up with his jacket, put it in a box he had in his vehicle, made a trek back to North Carolina, made a few phone calls and found me. And long story short, this bird spent a lot of time in rehab with me and working with a veterinarian. And he recovered. But his wing is still injured enough that it's a disability for flight. So he can fly just well enough to get away from me, but he's not well enough to capture his food and escape his enemies. So he's been permitted as an educational bird by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's why Harry, as we call him, is here today. That name Harry has nothing to do with the Harry Potter things. I know there's owls and Harry Potter, but the guy who rescued him, he just wanted to call him something. He nicknamed him Harry. And even to this day, he still comes and sees Harry every once in a while, sends me a check every once in a while to help cover some of the costs that are associated with Harry being in captivity and his feeding bill. So he can name him anything he wants to, you know. But he felt a connection, and a lot of times, you know, that's probably the only time he'll ever see a barred owl up close is when you rescue one off the highway. So he's got that connection there, you know. But an owl encounter is a really special wild encounter, and sometimes you won't see them because they're mostly out at night, but sometimes you'll hear them. Now, on the count of three, I'm going to see, so we had at least one person here who knew that this was a barred owl. I'm very impressed. Okay, now I'm going to see do any of you know what the barred owl's call sounds like that would be willing to, on the count of three, if you think you know what a barred owl sounds like, I just want you to make its call. Are you ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of different things. Good, that's good. I hear some little hooting sounds, a little howling sounds. I heard somebody say, what was that you just said over here?
Who cooks for you?
Who cooks for you? So they say that the call of a barred owl sounds like somebody saying, who cooks for you all? Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? You know, but it's really the rhythm. It's just not really saying that, but it's the rhythm of that. So when it comes out of the owl, it's a little bit more like, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? Or sometimes they just shorten and go, or sometimes they go, and make monkey-like sounds. Or sometimes you get too close to them, they make a human-like scream. And something that Harry does sometimes, depending on how stressed he is and how long he stays out, when I put him back in his carrier, sometimes he has this, I'm glad that's over with, call, and he quacks like a duck. So I don't know if he'll quack like a duck for you today. It depends on how stressed he is a little bit, but we'll put him up here in just a moment. But Harry the barred owl, you know, the average person, even if you spend a lot of time outdoors, unless you spend time camping or walking in the woods at night, a lot of people have never actually seen a live owl in person, so to speak, but they probably have heard one. And believe it or not, most owls do not hoot. The barred owl has a series of hoots. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? Its bigger cousin, the great horned owl, has a whoo, 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 kind of a deep resonating hoot. But most of our other owl species that live around here have other calls that they make. They can make shrieks and wailing sounds and clicking sounds and all kinds of things. But most of them actually don't hoot. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize. So the barred owl and the great horned owl, our two largest owls around here, are the ones that actually make the hooting sounds. The others make some other sounds that you might have heard and you didn't even realize you were listening to an owl. So that's Harry the barred owl, a pretty interesting wild encounter. And hopefully you won't experience it quite as close as I did. Yes?
So how long do they live in the wild?
A good question. So in the wild, some of the larger owls can have a long lifespan, but being a predatory animal, they wouldn't live that long in the wild compared to what they can attain in captivity. So if this bird was in the wild, like I've had about 13, 14 years, it would probably be composted at this point in time, But in captivity, as it gets older, we can protect it from diseases, enemies. As it gets older, it can't hunt as well. It's still going to be fed. So it can attain probably twice the lifespan it would in the wild. But most wild birds like this, maybe 10 years in the wild might be good, 8 to 10 or something like that. But in captivity, some can live a lot longer. So, good question. All right. Any other questions about the owl? Yes.
I just have a question about your relationship with the owl.
Okay.
I've been watching the owl, like looking at you,
right,
and I just want
well, I'll tell you a little bit about that. People will mention that a lot of times. So it looks like it's looking at me. Oh, I love you, Carlton. Oh, no, this bird hates me. This bird is a wild bird that had to live in captivity out of no choice of its own. It looks at me constantly because I am the only one that has contact with it. You won't be touching the bird. I'm the one that pulls it in and out of the carrier. I'm the one that does anything. I'm the one that puts the equipment on its legs. So it knows that I'm the biggest threat to it all the time. So even though I go and I feed this bird, it goes to programs, it seems like it's adjusted to me. It's learned to do these types of things, but it does not like me. So don't mistake that stare as a sweet look. It's not a sweet look for me. It is a look of disdain and what are you going to do next? When are you going to put me up? When are you going to leave me alone? That kind of stuff. So I wish it was the other way.
Are they social?
They are. Barred owls are particularly social with some of the other owls there, so they have a lot of interaction. Yeah. So luckily, Harry lives with another owl, and his name is Franklin because that's where he came from, Franklin, North Carolina. He also has a wing injury from also being hit by a car, a permanent wing injury that he can no longer survive in the wild. In fact, we thought it was healed up well enough we could release him, and he failed to release, and he had to come back to live in captivity. So he has company. Misery loves company, as they say. So I don't know if they're miserable, but they live in a big outdoor enclosure, and so they swap their. Remember that time I got hit by a car? Let me tell you about the time I got hit by a car. Look at my scars, and that kind of stuff. So, but he lives a good life.
Is it true that their head turns completely around?
It is true that their head can turn 180 degrees and look behind them. It can go an extra 90 degrees beyond that. So if you were an owl and you want to show off, you could turn left or right and turn your head 3/4 of a circle, 270 degrees either direction, but it cannot go a full 360. But sometimes they turn one way and then turn their head back around the other way so quick it looks like they went on one direction. But 270 degrees is a maximum, but I've noticed that most owls don't do that, but they often do look 180 degrees behind them to see what's going on. Not quite there, but in any case, yeah. So that's very easy for them. They have a few extra vertebrae in their neck, and they have to be able to do that because their eyes never move. You say, well, I've seen the eyes, well, the head's moving, the eyes never move. The eyelids blink, but the eyes never move. They don't have any muscles to move the eyes, so they're fixed in their socket. So for them to look up or down or left or right, they got to take their whole head to do that. So that nature gives them a little bit of extra mobility there with extra bones in the there in the swing turnaround. But hawks can do the same thing, believe it or not, very well. But we just don't see them doing that very much. Okay, all right. Here goes Harry back in, and listen carefully. You might hear him quack like a duck. But you might not. When I want him to do it, he never does it. Okay, next wild encounter is with another creature that comes out mostly at night. But animals are very adjustable, adaptable. And I've seen more of these animals come out in the daylight lately than they used to, but they're still more of a nocturnal creature. And this is an animal that I'm sure you've all probably had a wild encounter with at some point in time. But it's an animal that is very much misunderstood and not appreciated. So hopefully today I can teach you something about this animal that you'll learn to appreciate and realize how unusual of a wildlife neighbor you have and how really cool this animal is. Now, when I take this animal out, I'm going to show you just its tail to start with. And I'll be willing to bet you know exactly what it is when I just show you the tail. You'll know exactly what it is. Possum. Yep. Possum. All right. Now, we normally call these animals an opossum if you want to be technically correct, but I say possum like most people do. You know, opossum is just too long of a word. But here's an opossum or possum, whatever. And let me tell you a little bit about a possum. First of all, when you see a possum, you say, oh, they're common, they're no big deal. You know, there's a little saying that familiarity breeds contempt. And what that means is, when you're very familiar with something, you often don't respect as much as you should. For instance, take our own human families. You have kids, or kids have you as parents or grandparents, whatever. And when you have kids and parents and families together, we see the worst of each other, we see the best of each other. You know, but we just are ourselves. Now, if you go and meet a neighbor or something you've never met before, a stranger, it's like, you're on your best behavior. Hey, how are you doing? Shaking your hand and that kind of stuff. You're on your best behavior. But when you're around your family, you can kind of let it all hang out, so to speak, and act the way you want to. So sometimes you're really bad, sometimes you're really good. But we just kind of take the people close to us for granted, and we sometimes let our bad behavior show. So when people see animals that they are very accustomed to, they don't take them seriously. Like most people don't know how unusual an animal a gray squirrel is. They just see them as something's eating all my bird seed or something like that, you know, jumping around on my roof, you know. And some other animals, they just, because they're so common, we don't think they're such a cool creature. But if you came from another country and you came over here and said, whoa, look at those little animals that jump into trees, and they think that was a pretty cool thing because they may not have squirrels where they came from. But possums are very common like that. So a lot of people take them for granted because they're so common. But what you're looking at here is a very unusual animal. This is a very unique animal. This is one of a kind because this is the only representative of its kind in all of North America. Now, this animal has some very unusual characteristics. One is that it is a marsupial. And if you're a marsupial, that means you carry your young in a pouch. And if you're a possum, you carry up to 13 young in your pouch, which means that they are cousins of kangaroos. Or kangaroos or cousins of possums, or they works both ways. But you're looking at a North American kangaroo, so to speak, a North American marsupial here. Not only do they have a pouch, which is a very unusual thing. The only mammal in all of North America has a pouch to carry its young. They have something that only humans have and primates have. It's called a thumb, an opposable thumb. Everybody show me your thumb. Now imagine if your thumb was where your big toe was. Then you'd be like a possum. They have don't bite my shoulder. Oh, you're smelling those other things I've been handling. Don't do that. So on their feet, on their back foot, where their big toe is, they have, whoa! I'm back here. All right, I'll put you back on here. They have a thumb on their hind foot where your big toe would be, all right? So an opposable thumb. So that's kind of interesting. Now, their front hands are very monkey-like, and they can actually grasp things and hold it to their mouth and eat. So that's pretty unusual. Also, if you look at the other end of the possum here, the nose, they have a bloodhound nose. They can smell the slightest little thing from a great distance, so they have an incredible sense of smell. They have mouse-like ears. They have all these little whiskers on their face, like little tripwires that help them capture insects and stuff in the darkness. And if we go to the other end of the possum, this tail here, which isn't that a beautiful tail? No, it's not. It's not bushy like a fox. It's not ringed and furry like a raccoon. But it's a useful working tail. Look, it's magical. It grasps whatever it comes in contact with. Possums do not hang by their tails, but they use their tail as an extra grasper to hold on to things, okay? So their tail is very useful, a very useful working tail. And a possum has more teeth than a grizzly bear. More teeth than any other North American mammal. They have this. I'm going to check your math skills here. We're doing 5 at a time. We're going to count how many teeth a possum has. Are you ready? 5.
10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. 50. Okay, so pretty unusual. Okay, all right. So that said, let me tell you a little bit about this possum here.
before we move on to our next couple of wild encounters to finish things out here. And I'm going to bring this possum by if you want to, while I talk about it. If you want to take one hand that you don't mind losing, I mean one hand that you want to test and see what a possum feels like, you can touch his tail or touch his fur as I come by the way, which is soft like a cat. But do not touch his face, because his face has all the little tripwires. His face has the 50 teeth. And they like to test bite anything that smells good. And your hands, they say, well, I just want, how many teeth did you see? You don't want any little punctuals of being tested but to see if anything's edible in your hand. But they're always like, what's I can eat? What can I eat? You know. So I've been handling those things. I got to keep my hands away from his face. But I'll bring it by, and while I'm talking about it, I'm going to tell you the story about this possum here. Why you can have an encounter with this possum today, because this possum was raised in captivity, but it once was in the wild. And we're going to let her kind of hang on to the branch there.
Why does it look cross-eyed?
And she looks cross-eyed because she's not really cross-eyed, because she's old. This possum has just passed its 1 year of birthday, which means it's very old in possum years. In the wild, most possums only live about a year. In captivity, they can sometimes live a couple years or longer, but they are just a very short-lived animal in the world of nature. For some reason, possums just don't live very long. Okay, but she'll live longer in captivity because she's, kept away from cars that often hit possums and animals that often eat possums, that sort of thing.
Wow.
But in any case, she was in her mother's pouch a little bit over a year ago, and her mother crossed a busy highway, and you guess what happened next? The mother possum was killed by a car. And I'll come back to that other side over there in just a moment. And somebody came along next day, scooped up what was left in there. There was about 3 baby possums that were still alive, and they took them home and kind of hand raised them, and they became very tame. And then they took them to a wildlife rehabilitation facility where they hoped they could wild them up, but they stayed very tame, and they could not be released. So this possum and its siblings, 2 of its siblings that survived, ended up having to come and live somewhere as a captive possum, and so that meant me, because I use animals like this in education programs. So this possum can never be released back to the wild because it's just too tame. Okay, it doesn't know what it should be afraid of. And we can find its food probably, because it eats a lot of different things. It's got a great sense of smell, but it would just never make it as a wild animal. So, but don't ever attempt to make possums pets or any kind of wild animal, because even if they seem tame to begin with, as they get older, they lose their tameness sometimes, and they become wanting to be a wild creature, but then they don't have any survival skills to live in the wild at that point. So, and it's also against the law in most cases to have an animal like this as a pet. So you can pet this possum, and it's not a pet possum. It's just a tame possum.
Do they really kill snakes?
Oh, they'll eat anything they can catch, but they're somewhat of a scavenger. But they'll also eat a lot of bugs, insects, one of their major foods. They'll eat wild fruits and berries. They'll capture a mouse or something to eat. Anything they can catch and eat is something that they will feed on. So.
Birdseed.
Oh, they love birdseed. Fallen birdseed at bird feeders. Yeah.
These babies are. It's he.
This is a she.
Oh, it's she.
It's a she.
How long did you say you expect her to live?
She'll probably live to be about a couple years old, probably in captivity. I've had a few possums that made it to 4 years of age, but that's kind of rare. Doesn't happen very often. But the thing about the cross eyes is that's just a sign of old age. Your eyes start to sag, you get bags around your eyes, muscles get loose, that kind of stuff. I feel for you.
Did you say they were mostly nocturnal?
Huh?
Are they nocturnal?
They are mostly nocturnal, but more and more they are starting to be out some in the daytime. Depends on if something disturbs their hiding place, or where they're trying to find extra food or something like that. So don't be surprised if you see a possum out during the daytime. Okay, we're going to finish up here with 2 more quick wild encounters. The next one we're not going to touch, we're just going to look at, and then the last one we are going to touch, if you want to, that is. So the next one is a kind of a furry creature that is an animal that if you live in the mountains, you can see during the daylight hours. And just kind of like the possum, this is an animal that a lot of people don't have a lot of respect for, because familiarity breeds contempt or something like that, And one of my very first wild encounters is this creature in the mountains here of North Carolina. It was many years ago when I moved here, and I was sitting on my porch looking at my garden from a distance on a nice summer day, And this guy came driving down the road in a pickup truck. He slowed down in front of my house. I thought he's a neighbor going to come welcome me to the neighborhood or something like that. But instead, I noticed he rolled his window down. Out comes a big long gun. Bam! He shot! Not at me, but he shot something in my garden. And he jumped out and he ran in there and picked up this furry creature and comes up and run up and throws him back in his truck and starts to drive off. And I gave him, "What are you doing?" You know, and he gave me the funniest look like he thought he was doing me a favor. He was shooting something that was in my garden. Something that was eating my produce and stuff that I was trying to grow, but it was an animal kind of new to me at the time, and I thought it was kind of cool, and I was kind of mad that he shot it, and he thought he was doing me a favor. So what did he shoot? He shot one of these right here. He shot a big fat squirrel. Yeah, it is a squirrel. You're laughing at me, but I'm serious. This is a squirrel. Now, it has some other names. This is a type of a ground squirrel that lives in our mountains. And it's the largest ground squirrel. They can climb trees because they're a squirrel, but they normally dig a hole in the ground. But they have two other names. If you were up in the northeast United States, you would call this animal a woodchuck. If you live down here where you're out here, you might call it a groundhog. And if you were an old timer who lived here 100 years ago, you might call this a whistle pig. Because they make a high-pitched whistling sound when they're frightened. But this is a groundhog. And this groundhog does have a name. Her name is Rose Bay. And she was hit by a car when she was a youngster a couple years ago. And about the size of my hand. She was too big to be, too small to be away from her mom, but something must happen to her mom because she wandered out of her burrow because that's where groundhogs live, in a hole in the ground. And she got hit by a car. And luckily she wasn't killed because most groundhogs get hit by a car are dead. And she was small, but she was taken to a wildlife rehabilitation facility where she was kind of handled like, and she made a full recovery, but by the time she made her full recovery, she really didn't know she was a groundhog anymore. She'd been handled by people too much, and so she needed a place to go live, not as a pet, but as an education animal. So she came to live with me. So she's very tame, and her name is Rose Bay. She's named after the Rose Bay rhododendrons, will soon be blooming here in the mountains, because that's the time of year I ended up with her. And groundhogs have always fascinated me, particularly since I noticed that the local residents like to shoot them because they sometimes get into the gardens and all, but groundhogs are the only animal that has their own day of the year named after them. Groundhog Day, February 2nd, when according to legend, groundhogs come out of their burrow, and if they see their shadow, what happens? 6 more weeks of winter. If they don't see their shadow, supposedly have an early spring. Yeah, and there's a movie, you know, so people know about Groundhog Day. So groundhogs are kind of famous animals for that regard. But for the average person that sees a groundhog, they are a pest. But I find them a very fascinating creature and a very smart animal, being that they're a member of the squirrel family. And a lot of people don't know they're actually squirrels. But they are pretty cool animals. And of course, Groundhog Day has always fascinated me. And the early settlers that grew up in this area, they used groundhogs for a lot of purposes. Leather products, they ate groundhogs, they used their skins to make banjos and things like that, and shoelaces, and there's even an old song called Old Groundhog about all the many uses that early settlers had for groundhogs. So groundhogs have always fascinated me for a variety of reasons, so I'm kind of a groundhog aficionado, and I like them, and I will never shoot a groundhog. But other people, you know, they don't care too much for them, except on Groundhog Day. Question about groundhogs, yes?
Are we going to get the pet one, or are we going to get the pet?
Well, I was going to try to finish the program here. I thought maybe if you stay a little bit later, I'll pull her out at the very end, okay? All right, so we need to, yes.
Are they also called prairie dogs?
No, prairie dogs are related to them. So prairie dogs are kind of like a western relative of the groundhog, and they have prairie dog towns where they have a lot of burrows together. But here in the east, groundhogs, they have just a single burrow where they live, and they're always solitary unless they have babies. Go back into your burrow. Back into your burrow. Go back in there. It's not Groundhog Day. Go back. Okay, all right. All right, so we don't keep you too long here on this beautiful day here. We're going to move on to our last wild encounter. And this last wild encounter is the reason I'm here today. Not because I just want to show you this, but it's the reason I'm a naturalist. And I'll tell you a quick story, kind of a two-part story. And back when I was a kid, about 5 years old. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, east of here about 2 hours. And when I was 5, we lived on the outskirts of Charlotte, not in the town limits. We lived in a wooded area. We had big yards. We had all these trees out there that were always dropping leaves, and we had a lot of leaves to rake up. Nowadays, people had all those big loud leaf blowers. We didn't have leaf blowers when I was a kid. There was no such a thing. Rakes. You had to rake up the leaves. And me as a 5 or 6 year old, I had to do my duty. And so one afternoon in October, it was a very warm day in October, me and my sister had to go out and rake the leaves in the yard. And so we went into our garage to get some tools like the rakes and stuff like that. And then we stopped horrified because about 3 steps inside of our garage on the ground lay a 3-foot long snake. And it was kind of black in color with some kind of a markings on it, kind of chain-like pattern of markings on it, kind of whitish or yellowish. And I have never been so terrified of anything in my life. The snake was no danger to me, whatever, but I didn't know that. I'd been taught snakes were horrible things. And I felt like I was almost paralyzed. I had just enough oomph me to hide behind my big sister and look at it. And I felt like my temperature dropped 50 degrees. I just felt like I was at death's door. Most horrible thing, I'm going to die. I've looked at the most horrible thing in the world. Now fast forward about 20 years into the future, and I used to work at the Western North Carolina Nature Center over here in Asheville. And at that point in time, I was in charge of the reptile collection. And I would do reptile programs and snake programs. I would talk to people on the phone about issues and stuff like that, And something happened between then and there that made me like snakes. What happened is I actually went to an education program in a zoo, and I found out snakes are pretty cool creatures. But before that, I was terrified. But now I'd learned that snakes were really cool. I got a phone call from a lady, which was not unusual, but we get phone calls all the time there about people with wildlife questions. But this one stood out in my mind. It was like one of a million calls. This lady called and said, I work at a warehouse on the other side of Asheville. There's a snake in our warehouse, and I'm absolutely terrified. I'm the secretary. Can you come over here and get it out? We're all terrified. And I said, well, man, I'd love to, but I got a job here. I'll tell you. Talk to me on the phone what it looks like, and I'm sure it's a harmless snake. I said, but you don't understand. I am absolutely terrified of snakes like you just cannot believe. I am actually on the second floor, is down at the basement level in our warehouse. I'm on the second floor. I've gone down the hallway to my office. I've closed the door and locked my door. I am sitting on top of my desk talking to you on the phone. Now, that's back before we had cell phones where you could talk anywhere. This was a corded phone. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about, a corded phone. Older folks say, yeah, and young folks say, what? Had a cord that stuck into the wall, and you can only go as far as the cord would go. And she was on her desk, locked in her office, 1 floor above a snake that was and she was so terrified. I said, I was trying not to laugh, but I knew how it was to be terrified of snakes. So I was trying to calm her down. It's probably not a venomous snake, not like a copperhead or something. They don't normally come in buildings. So well, just calm down and just describe it to me. I'll be willing to bet it's some kind of harmless snake, like a rat snake or something like that. They come in buildings. So, but as frightened as she was, she actually gave me a great description. She says it's about 3 feet long. It's got blue black in color, and it's got these markings, like a chain-like markings on kind of yellowish or white. Oh, I know exactly what that is, ma'am. Went back to my childhood when I saw the exact same description of a snake, and I was terrified. Suddenly, I was on top of the desk with her on the phone, so to speak, and I realized just how terrified she was. I said, ma'am, I'm going to make an exception in your case. I'm going to take my lunch early. I'm going to clock out from my job. I'm going to drive over there and give me directions. This is also before GPS. You had to have people would tell you how to, you turn right at the stoplight and you take another left and you go down, and that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I said, if the snake is still there, I'll get it and move it, But I normally couldn't do that kind of stuff. So I dashed over there as quick as I could, walked into this deserted building on the lower level, big concrete floor, many times bigger than this gazebo. 2 big old guys were standing in the corner. You from the nature center? Yeah, I said, yeah, it's over there. It's over there. And right in the middle of the room, there lay a snake, about 3 feet long, with a kind of a pattern on it, of kind of white and yellowish pattern, chain-like pattern, laying on the ground. And I knew even from a distance what it was. And I walked closer, and I realized it was exactly what I thought it was, exactly what I saw when I was a kid. And I saw a snake, and I was absolutely terrified. And I walked over there to the middle of the room, this big concrete floor, and I reached out and I said, oh my gosh, this is an eastern king snake. I've not seen one of these in many, many years. I picked it just like that. Didn't try to bite me. I kind of wrapped it around my hand because they're a constrictor. They're muscular. That kind of made it kind of feel comfortable. I didn't let it dangle. I didn't grab it behind the head or anything like that. And I just leave that price. Oh, man, I'm so glad I got to come over here. I haven't seen one of these in so long. I'll take this to the Nature Center. Y'all don't have to worry about it. This is a great type of snake. We'll put on exhibit. We'll use it from our education programs and teach people about snakes and stuff. Thank you very much for calling me. So I kind of wandered off, looked over my shoulder. These guys were just wiping the sweat off their brow. Big guys, they're scared to death, And that's what it was. It's an eastern king snake. Now, down here, if you live around this area here, there are a lot of snakes down here around Girton and everything. And one of the snakes you might find down here are eastern king snakes. They're usually kind of found near water a lot of times. But there's other kind of snakes that are found here too. Rat snakes, milk snakes, rattlesnakes, copperheads, and many other types of snakes. But most snakes you see are probably non-venomous. But the king snake is one of the most neat snakes of all. And I've always had a kind of a love-hate relationship with it. It's all love now, but it used to be hate because that's a snake I saw when I was a kid. But we realized why that snake was in our garage later. From that day on, the mice we had in our garage started to disappear. We had a mouse problem. I didn't mention it, but in our garage, we'd go in there and you'd see mice all the time jumping on the tool benches and stuff like that. You pick up a tool, it has sticky mouse poop and stuff on it, and you'd open up a drawer to get a tool. The little baby mice in a little nest there, and it just smelled like a mouse factory. And it was just, and it was just kind of like a plague, And then once the weather got cold and we knew the snakes had gone, me and my father, we started cleaning up the garage. And he had a lot of bird seed stored in there. He had a job where he got bird seed as a kind of extra bonus, bags of busted bird seed that we could put in our bird feeders. And mice had found it. House mice, not mice that live out in the woods. Those are good mice. House mice are a kind of a mouse that's transported across the world. They're native to Europe, but they get in our houses, they get in the walls, they spread disease and stuff like that. And this snake had smelled that, come in, and we found dozens of shed snake skins. I don't know if they're all from the same snake. Might have been a couple other snakes. But we didn't find a single mouse. But shed snake skins, we cleaned everything up, and I learned a valuable lesson how snakes are great predators and keep rodents under control. So ever since then, snakes have been, like an eastern king snake has been on my top list of snakes. Something I used to be terrified of, but now something I think is really cool. So I'm going to share with you the magic as our last final encounter here. I'm going to walk around here, and if you've never gotten to touch a snake, let the magic rub off on you. When I went to a zoo when I was a kid, a couple years after I saw that snake for the first time. Went to an education program there where they took a snake out, told me all these things I used to think were true about snakes weren't true. The reason I hated snakes, they were all lies. They're all misrepresentations. And when I heard the truth, I said, maybe I don't need to be afraid of snakes. And they said, would you like to touch one? Me and a bunch of other people. And I remember I got up as a kid, touched that snake. It's like magic rubbed off of me. Like I had a dark room to turn the light so I saw the world for what it was. Snakes were cool creatures. They were smooth and dry. They weren't horrible creatures. They were beautiful patterns and colors. And I left that zoo crazy in a good way. I couldn't wait to find a snake. Before then, I couldn't wait to get away from a snake. Changed my life. So an interest in snakes led to an interest in other reptiles, led to an interest in owls and possums, and that's why I'm a naturalist here talking about animals with you today. So I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had interesting encounters with a snake early on. That changed my life. So in any case, not trying to make you become an interpretive naturalist or anything like that, but a healthy respect for any of these animals, particularly snakes, is something that everybody should have because these are your wild neighbors. So I'm going to walk around here, and the snake is not venomous. It's a totally harmless snake. You can touch it, smooth and dry to touch, beautiful pattern. And I'll tell you a little bit more about snakes in general as I come by, and then we'll wind our program up. So, if you watch a snake, you'll see its tongue come out. That's how they smell. They can find other snakes that way. They can find their food and trace down their food that way. King snakes are very muscular. That's why it's wrapped around my hand, because they're a constrictor. They bite their prey, which could be a mouse or something, and they wrap coils of its body around it to suffocate it and squeeze it to death, and then they swallow it whole. And snakes don't have to eat every day like a lot of animals do. They can go for weeks or months without eating if they absolutely have to. And they're just such an interesting creature. King snakes get to be about 4 or 5, even 6 feet long sometimes. This is about an average size eastern king snake. There's many other types of king snakes. You might wonder why we call it a king snake. We call it a king snake because they're such a powerful constrictor, but not only do they eat things like rats and mice, they eat other snakes as well. So they might even eat another king snake, which is not a good thing, but they'll eat whatever they can get in touch with that they can find. and they are noted for also eating venomous snakes. They'll eat rattlesnakes and copperheads if the snake they're eating is small enough that they can swallow it and overpower it. And if they're bitten by an animal like that, they are immune to the venom of our native venomous snakes. So some people that don't like snakes in general like king snakes because of that, but a lot of people mistake black rat snakes we have around here with king snakes, because a lot of times black rat snakes, which are very common around here, have a little bit of white on their bodies, and they mistake the pattern for that of a king snake. But king snakes are not as common as some other snakes, but where they are common, they may be the most common snake because they eat up all the competition. But they're such an interesting animal.
Is this full grown?
This is a full-grown snake, but it can get bigger. Yeah. So it's a mature, but it can definitely get larger.
Why is it not trying to bite you?
It's been handled a lot. And generally speaking, most king snakes are somewhat docile disposition to begin with. Not all of them are like that, but most of them will calm down. But never just pick up a wild snake, even if it's a king snake, because it could bite. They'll also musk you. They may poop on you because they're a wild animal and they think you're trying to eat them. So they have their defenses. There are a lot of snakes that shake their tails and make themselves look like rattlesnakes. There's a lot of snakes that spread their heads and make themselves look like a venomous snake. Do all kinds of things, puff their bodies up with air. Because there's so many things that eat a snake, they have a lot of enemies, so they have to look pretty frightening to anything that comes along, in hopes that that's not going to be something that's going to eat them, trying to scare away their enemies. And of course, one of the snake's big enemies are us human beings, because people try to kill snakes, and that's not as prevalent a thing today as it used to be. But when I was growing up, that's what you did. You killed snakes because they were the evil thing out there. So in any case, I'm going to wind up the program here. Does anybody have any other quick questions? I'll stay for a few minutes. Maybe take the groundhog out right quick for somebody wants to touch it, or answer a quick question about something here that everybody wants to hear, and then I'll stay for a few extra minutes. Yes?
My daughter wants to do what you do.
Okay.
And wants to know if you had to go to college.
Okay. It's helpful, but most of the things I learned about wild creatures like this, I learned on my own. But if you go to college and anywhere and take courses, related to animals, zoology, biology, all that kind of stuff will help you.
Wow,
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But a lot of stuff you'll have to learn on your own. All right. Well, hopefully you had a good time today. Hopefully you are looking forward to having a wild encounter of your own. It could happen between here and the parking lot. There's rocks and things that attract snakes, or the sky where the birds are. And it doesn't have to be an animal. It could be a plant, a wildflower, a bug, an insect. It could be anything. But go out and make sure you have some kind of a wild encounter, and appreciate it when it happens, because it could be a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Or it could be something you've seen hundreds of times. Wild encounters are great to have, so I hope you look forward to having them your entire life like I do. I love wild encounters. Special moments in time.